If you would, open your Bibles to the book of, I was going to say First Philippians. If you find Second Philippians, we need to check about our Bibles here. First Philippians. Philippians chapter 1. I was awakened Tuesday night, believe it or not. This past month or two, I was awakened with dreams and specific words, and the Lord woke me up. And how many of you wake up sometimes in the middle of the night? I've learned this much: when He's asking me a question, I don't know the answer, obviously, but the question was, what are you pressed into? And so I started to think, this trouble is pressing me. This trouble is conflicting me. How many of you going through difficulties at times that you just feel pressed? Not one of you. All right. God bless the rest of you. This is for me then. And so I thought, okay, Lord, I'll just, I don't know what you're saying, but I'll listen. And so Thursday night, I had this dream, and I'll share it with you here in just a moment. But He quoted the scripture to me in Philippians 1, and we're going to read it. But I want you to think about, before we read it, where this scripture is written out of. Paul finds himself in a jail cell. He is not in the best place. He is pressed by affliction. He is pressed by limitation. And yet, he has the ability, look at verse 6, if you would, Philippians 1, to say this much. Philippians 1, verse 6. Think about it. I don't know if I had this mood if I was where he's at, but in Philippians 1, this is what he says. For I know, and I'm convinced of, that what? He who began the work in you is able to perfect it. Now, wait a minute. He's at the end of his life. He's not in the best situation. And yet he says, I know that what He started in me, He will finish it. He knows how to bring me to the finish line. I'm not even thinking the finish line. I'm just like, get me out of jail. That's what some of us would be thinking. But I think Paul has learned to live between these two realms. And that's what I want to speak to you today. Living between two realms. Because how many of you know that you lived on this natural world called the earth? You do live here, whether you want to or not. You may be absent, but you do live here. But yet you are called to live and get your instructions from a total different realm. He calls it heaven. And so Paul, look with me if you would at verse 9. He says, but I'm praying that your love may abound still more in real knowledge and discernment. Here he is saying to the church at Philippi, look, I know that whatever you're going through, God is able to perfect the thing He started inside of you. You may be in a place of limitation, you may be in jail, you may be in a difficult place, but I know that He's able to bring you to the finish line. Here's what I'm praying for you: that your love, your knowledge, and discernment grow stronger. How many of you know that maybe we need a little bit more love? I do. I can turn on the news and I will tell you it pushes my buttons. One way or the other. I think half Washington is crazy. But you and I live with the consequences of it. But what is Paul saying? Stop paying attention to it. Let your love abound even more. So watch this. He says, I know he can finish what he started in you, but pray that love, knowledge, and discernment abound even more. And so I finally said, okay, Lord, what are you getting at? And what he was saying to me was, you're allowing all these things that are pressing at you to define what should be pressing at you, which is heaven. Now watch this. So I have this dream, and this happened Thursday night. And it was a series of 3 dreams, and I'm not going to bore you with the whole thing, but I felt there was a prophetic word for me first. But I also feel that it's got a relevance for the church. So in this dream, I knew these 2 people, but they were trying to kill me. Isn't that lovely? And so I was fighting and I was fussing, and I finally said, okay, if it's that way, just kill me. Get it over with. And I remember putting my arms like this, like just kill me. And when I did that, they said, oh no, we love you. It was just a joke. And I'll be honest with you. I got so mad. Maybe love needs to abound in that dream. I was so mad that I started to fuss at these people. Suddenly, I saw this thing coming out from under the earth, and it was like, I'm not into Transformers or any of that stuff, but it looked like one of those Transformer things coming out of the earth. I've had to learn, by the way, I've had to learn some new movies, the Paw Patrol, all these other things that I'm just like, I don't even know who these people are, but we're going to learn who they are. And I don't know how to pronounce some of them. I don't even know. So I'm getting educated. But I saw this thing coming out of my left side, and I could see it with my peripheral view, and it was like a transformer thing, snake coming out from under the earth, coming out to destroy. It was as if it was coming to destroy the city. And in the dream, I went to the city and I said, this is coming. So please make preparation. So I went back, and I don't know, it's a dream. Amen. So I went back to try to push this thing and try to destroy the thing, but it's too big. And I woke up. And obviously, I did not want to go back to sleep because this had happened 4 times that night, and I was a little tired by then. And I woke up and I said, God, what are you saying? Because I know this is a God dream. And this is what he said. You have allowed things that you feel are trying to kill you or bring you down to distract you from the very thing that's rising out from the earth to bring destruction. And I've called you to be my voice and my eyes and to stand against this thing that's coming out. And I thought, okay, what you and I face so many times, whether it's family issues, job issues, health issues, battle issues, whatever it is, and I have quite a few of them, have distracted me from the very thing God is trying to press me into so that I can become a voice and stand against it. And in that dream, he said, it's time, and this is the year to take territory, not to go into the caves, into the hills and hide. It's time to come and take territory. But I said, Lord, this thing is so huge. You see, that's when I realized what he was saying. And this is what he was saying. Verse 21. Are you still in Philippians? In First Philippians? First Philippians 21. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. In other words, living here is all about Jesus, but dying is all about Christ. And here's what the Lord pressed me into, and I'm trying to get you to see today. Verse 22, but if I am to live in the flesh, this will mean fruitful labor for me. And I don't know what to choose, because I am hard pressed from both directions. A desire to depart and be with Christ, because that's much better. But yet to remain in the flesh, it is more necessary for your sake. Think about this. Paul is pressed between choosing one realm or the other realm. And I don't know about you, but I think you and I need to learn to live that way. I don't think this is talking about death. I think this is talking about never losing the assignment that God put on you when He got a hold of you. Because sometimes the current situations you face block you from seeing the eternal purpose God put inside of you. In fact, when you go to Philippians 3, verse 12, he says it this way, not that I've already obtained or that I've become perfect. What is he trying to become perfect in? Love, knowledge, and discernment. Watch what he says. But I press on in order that I may lay a hold of that for which I was also laid a hold of by Christ Jesus. Here's what he says. Here's heaven, here's earth, and I am hard pressed between what to choose. I don't know what to choose anymore. But I'm hard pressed between the two realms. But here's what I'm doing. I need to find out when he got a hold of me. Look at the picture of just him getting a hold of you. When he got a hold of you, Paul is saying, I may be in prison. They may be doing all this stuff. I might be at the end of my life. But I'm trying to find out what in the world did you have in mind when you got a hold of me? Can I tell you, the natural realm has the ability to make you forget the spiritual realm and the spiritual assignment he called you to fulfill on earth. And I'm afraid that when that happens, we're not able to see those things that come our way that God is saying, that's what you were born to. See beyond your today. See beyond the difficulties. See beyond what you're experiencing. See beyond the family this, the health this, the whatever it is that you're facing. God says, don't forget that your assignment is based on an eternal purpose. And I remember, this week I was like, okay, God, remind me. I've learned you got to be humble. You know that God can take you back to your beginning? How many of you have been saved more than 20 years? 30? I'm okay. I'm just going to leave it at that. Do you know that God can take you right back to the moment He saved you and tell you exactly what He called you for? He can bring clarity and ask you to see, are you doing what I've called you to do, or has life gotten the best of you? And that's what Paul is saying. I am hard pressed between these two realms. I don't know what to choose. but I'm still being pulled by this thing, and I'm going to find out what in the world that you have in mind for me. Because it's easy to throw in the towel when you are facing difficulties. And in the middle of the difficulties, Paul is saying, hey, I know that he who began the good work inside of me, he's able to perfect it. I need to grow in love, in knowledge, and discernment. And I need to find out what he got a hold of me. Look at the rest of the verse. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to forget what lies behind and press on towards the mark. He was hard pressed between two realms. And I realized this week, I got it yesterday, and I was praying yesterday, and I realized, the earthly duty that you and I you are called to do, you receive from a heavenly realm. And that's where he's at. He has not forgotten what he was born for. He has not forgotten what he was created for. Life can get you to forget what you were born here for, or born again to. You have and you carry a divine purpose and assignment. And you've got to find it out, because otherwise life, difficulties, transitions can get the best of you, and you can just settle for doing something that you were not even called to. And Paul is saying, don't do that. I am personally being hard pressed between this realm and that realm, and I don't know what to choose. And obviously I got convicted this weekend. Or this whole week. It's been a week of, Lord, what in the world are you telling me? Am I going home? You start thinking, how many of you know your mind can get the best of you? Your mind can be your worst enemy if you don't watch it. I went to, I do this class called spinning, and I have a goal to do an hour, I want to do X amount of miles. I won't tell you because some people think I'm crazy. But I went on Thursday, I think it was. And I was 4 miles short. 4. I was so mad. But here's what happened to me. During my spin class, I was tired and they were pushing. And some of these people are... two French fries short of a Happy Meal. And I is one of them too. But everybody pushes each other. But I was getting tired, and I'm sweating, and the news came on. They have all these TVs at the gym, and I'm like, I started looking at it, and I'm like taking a break. I'm like, and then the other person was like, come on. And I'm like, oh, yeah, come on. And by the end of the class, I thought, dear Lord, I did not do it. I was so mad. So I go home, I'm soaking wet. Angie opens the door and says, how many miles did you do? I'm like, what are you asking me for? You didn't even go. I don't want to talk about this. Why am I saying all of that? Because your mind can get you to quit halfway through the race. And sometimes we lose the grip on the higher realm because of the friction and conflict that we faced on this realm. And this realm can wear you down. One of the prophetic things you read out of Daniel chapter 7, it says that the enemy came to wear down the saints. But the time also came when the saints rose up to take up the kingdom. And the wearing down there's also a place you rise to stand against that which is trying to bring destruction. And I will tell you, I feel that there is conflict coming our way. I know this is probably not the nicest prophetic word you want to hear today, but this is what the Lord spoke to me. And I don't think this is the year for the church to shrink back, to go hide, to go wait for the rapture. I think this is the year for the church to rise up, stand up, and say, God, we are taking authority over this thing. I'm thinking of this coronavirus in China. Think about it. It's affecting. There's some news reports they're saying they're not really saying all the right numbers of the people that are affected by it. But you know what? I am praying Psalms 91 and I'm saying, God, I am believing protection and pleading the blood of Jesus. And I'm going to stand up and rise up against this virus called coronavirus and start letting my love, knowledge, and discernment grow a little bit more and start praying for the people of China and say, God, let healing reign. In the middle of a disaster, rise up to bring revival. Difficulties have a way of reframing your perspective. I remember early in our marriage, I have to say our, because sometimes I say my kid, and Sue told me one time, I thought you and Angie had different kids, and I'm like, we do. Sometimes they're her kids, and sometimes they're my kids when they're nice. I won't say what you said. She thought Angie was 20 years old. She said, you look old. I'm like, excuse me? So I'm going to start coloring my hair. If you see it black, start covering all my gray, and I'm not. Anyway, here's what was I saying? I'm just trying to see if you're awake. So here's what I'm telling you. I was in this, our early marriage. We had just finished a conference in Central America, and we were in a plane on our way back to my house, and the plane started, there was a storm that night. I don't know if you've ever been in an airplane in a storm, but it's not my favorite experience. But sometime that night, the plane decided that it was a roller coaster night. And we started praying. We held hands, started praying, and then it got worse. And let me tell you, we started praying in tongues. It got worse. We started screaming. We thought, Jesus, if we're going down praying. But it reset our purpose and our mindset to the things that are important. So don't think that God cannot take a crisis and reset the mind of the church. Amen. And I'm telling you, we have a great purpose this year. Something is coming our way. Go with me to Jeremiah chapter 1. Because we need to think about how God stops a young man. Let me talk to some of the young people here. He stops this young man from living and doing his own thing to shifting to the eternal purpose he has for him. It's interesting that God would know when this boy was born. In fact, he starts speaking to him and he said, before you were even born, I knew you. Before your mama named you, I already knew your name. Which tells me that God is the author of life. Amen. Which tells me that God knows when you are conceived. And God speaks to him because he's calling him and saying, hey, would you stop living for the moment and live for the eternal purpose? You know what the young man said? Look at verse 6. I love his answer. First Jeremiah, verse 6. Then I said, Lord, you know I don't know how to speak. I'm just a youth. Jeremiah is probably a young kid, and he probably doesn't know how to speak. But God sees him as a prophet. God sees him as the one that can see beyond the trouble. God sees him as a fortified city. God sees him as God's mouthpiece for the trouble that's coming to the nation. Jeremiah sees himself, hey, I'm having a good time. I'm a youth. I don't even know how to speak. Would you pick somebody else? I love God. You read the rest of those verses. God so bypasses him and says, before you were born, I already knew who you were. I called you from your mother's womb. And he starts speaking identity. And finally, I think Jeremiah says, okay, let's work through this. So he speaks to Jeremiah. And in all of this, if you look with me at verse 11, he shows him two things, and he starts with his eyes. In Jeremiah chapter 1, look what he says. And the word of the Lord came to me saying, what do you see? And I said, I see a rod and an almond tree. Then the Lord said to me, you have seen well, for I am watching over my word to perform it. Okay, that helps me a lot. What does that even mean, God? Let me tell you what it means. God said, what you're seeing, that almond tree has a meaning. If you read the word almond tree in the Hebrew, it means the wakeful tree. This tree wakes up before any other tree wakes up. And it starts budding before any other tree. And what God is saying is, Jeremiah, you're seeing this almond tree and that rod because it's waking up before conflict comes its way. So here's the question I'm asking you. Are you going to be able to see what I'm bringing swiftly your way? Because God was trying to prepare his eyes to see before everybody else could see. And then God says, when you see before anybody sees, I do watch over my word to perform, watching it to perform it. Here's the story. God tells the prophet, learn to see before others see. Because I've given you the insight to see what's coming your way. You see, in my dream, I was distracted by this thing that was coming my way. Suddenly, out of my left-hand side, I saw this thing rising out of the earth. And God says, you've allowed the conflict, you've allowed the circumstances to distract you from the very thing I called you to be a voice to. And God says, the almond tree wakes up before any other tree. It buds. Would you wake and see the new swift things that are coming your way? Look at the next verse. This is amazing. Verse 13. And the word of the Lord came to me saying a second time, what do you see? I said, I see a boiling pot facing away from the north. Okay? I see a tree and I see a pot. Are we cooking today? What in the world do you want me to see? Here's what he was saying. A boiling pot is always a picture of war. And God is saying, I'm giving you this rod because you will have authority to see beyond anything that comes your way before it happens. And when war comes your way, I'm showing you the boiling pot so you get ready for it, so that you're not taken by surprise. What do you think God was after? He was after training the eyes of this young man to learn to see into the future so that he would be pressed between the heavenly realm, the earthly realm, and allow the assignment of God to teach him how to live in between realms. The natural realm can consume you in such a way that you forget the spiritual realm. My prayer is that you don't do the spiritual realm just on Sundays. Can I just talk to some church people now? My prayer is that you do the spiritual realm every day. That where you go to work, that's your place where you exercise the prophetic. That when you're raising your kids, moms or homeschooling, whatever you're doing, that's your spiritual realm. That when you are creating or when you are cutting or making a deal in business, that's your spiritual realm. And God is saying, hey, bring the kingdom into it because I'm showing you something beyond the natural realm. Can you imagine? Just think of this. If you and I would have had a dream 20 years ago and bought $10,000 worth of Home Depot stock, Apple stock. Why do we limit God? Because we're afraid of the risk. And yet God's trying to train us to see the almond tree that wakes up before any other tree. Here's what God says. God says, look, I'm sending you to be my voice and to be my emissary to the nation. They're going to fight you. You go to chapter 10, just make some notes for the sake of time. You go to chapter 10, verse 1, and God says, Jeremiah, do not be afraid of what the nations fear. Do not be perplexed of the signs that you see. Why? Because what you see is not determined by heaven. I'm trying to get you to see there's two realms. By the time you get to chapter 15 of Jeremiah, just jot this down if you would. Verse 19 and 20, he says, Jeremiah, I'm going to say this to you. If you learn to extract the worthless or the precious from the worthless, you're going to be my spokesman. They're going to come against you, but they're not going to be able to stand because you will be a fortified city. You will be a wall, and they are not going to prevail against you. Why would God say such a thing to Jeremiah? Because he was preparing him to prophesy to a nation. In this nation, in this particular case, watch God's picture of this. He shows him that the battle from the north would be Babylon. Babylon would come and bring God's people into captivity. But he was so connected with heaven that he started to prophesy the release of the Jews before they even went into captivity. Now help me understand this. To the point that in the days of Daniel gets a hold of this in Daniel chapter 10, and he says, hey, I just found the book of Jeremiah, and I remember he prophesied that once the 70 years were fulfilled, We're going back home. Here is God, wakes a young man, shows him the future, prophesies into the future, warns the nation. Another prophet comes, uses the words of Jeremiah, releases a nation to go back to its destiny. Could it be possible that that is heavenly economics and heavenly prophetic words for you and I to think about? That maybe we're being pressed by the natural to forget the heavenly assignment. Go to chapter 17, because by that time, Jeremiah is saying, look, don't get stressed about all this stuff that you're seeing. Don't even get to the point where you're afraid of the signs of the time. Amen. Rise up about this thing. I love what he says in verse 7. He says, look, I want you to think about this. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord. Regardless of what you're going through, the nation is going through, you can be like a tree that is planted by the waters. Well, but things are getting worse. No, they're not. That extends its roots by a stream. Look at this. And he will not fear when heat comes, but its leaves will be green. He won't even be anxious in the year of drought, nor will he stop to give fruit. Think about it. God says, don't worry, chapter 10, about what you see and experience. Chapter 15, he says, if you just learn to have eyes to extract the good things out of the worthless things, you'll be my spokesman. Oh, by the way, I want you to be so pressed by these two realms that even in the year of drought, you're not going to stop yielding fruit. You know what that tells me? That God knows how to protect you, your generation, and the next generation, and he knows how to stop us from our own tracks to cause us to see into what's coming our way. And I'm not prophesying doom and gloom, but I am telling you, this, what you are experiencing today and the conflict that you're feeling, especially in our nation, is a prophetic warning of God saying, church, it's time to rise up. It's time to begin to prophesy life into the bad situation. Because you know what's the easiest thing to do is say, oh, I just don't care. I said it last week and I'll say it again today. We have 25 million Christians not even registered to vote. We have a voice. I will tell you that Jeremiah was the voice to that nation for his day. You are the voice for the nation today. And I was very alarmed by this dream, but I know that God is not showing stuff to scare you. He's showing you stuff for you to be the voice and the eyes so that the almond tree wakes up before any conflict comes its way and starts prophesying life into it. Could it be possible that even as Abraham went into the city of Sodom and Gomorrah and saw all the wickedness, that he started negotiating before the trouble started? He said, hey, God, if there be 100 righteous. He knew there was not 100 righteous. He was after his nephew. Would you spare the city? God said, sure. Okay, if there be 50, sure. Then he cuts it close to the family. If there be Lot, he doesn't name names. Would you spare that city? He said, yeah. Why? Because he had the courage to look into the future, into the storm. As Christians, most of the time, what we tend to do is say, oh, no, just give me good news and just tell me nothing's going to happen. No, you are to be the eyes. You are to be the voice. You are to be the focal point of what God is saying. But just like it happened in the dream for me, I got so distracted by all these things that I didn't even see that thing coming out of the left-hand side of my view. And God is saying, don't allow the natural realm press you in such a way that you forget that the heavenly realm presses you to give you an assignment on the earth. Can you imagine being in the shoes of Paul, and he says, I don't know what realm to choose. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. What realm would you choose? When you're in jail, they didn't have 3-meal programs there. If you read the jails at that time, they were not the best jails. They really didn't like Christians at all. I have a question for you. Which realm? Well, don't answer it. I know what realm you would choose. You would choose the heavenly one. But he says, I have such an assignment, I cannot choose the heavenly right now. Let me close with this. Go to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. And I want you to consider this. Because I do think that you have the ability to see beyond the trouble. I think sometimes what we need to do is to fine-tune the station we are hearing. I know we don't have those radios anymore, but how many of you remember the old radios where you had to, it was like, am I the oldest person here in the church? God bless you. Angie, you weren't even born at that time. But how many of you remember those? You had to fine-tune. Could it be that you need to fine-tune your antennas and say, God, I want to be hard-pressed between these realms, but I want to understand, what is the almond tree telling me? He's waking me up before trouble comes. What is the boiling pot telling me? There is war coming my way, but I don't need to be afraid. I don't need to be afraid what the world is afraid of or the customs of the people. I need to rise up and realize that even in the year of drought, you can provide for me, and I don't need to be anxious in that time. Amen. I mean, I'm telling you. So look what he writes. 2 Corinthians 4. I love this because I would have written it a little bit different. But I'm not the writer. How many of you have gone through a trouble for more than a month? And it does tend to create a mindset sometimes. Doesn't it? Okay, you're not with me this morning. But verse 17, he says it this way. This momentary, come on. His momentary is about to kill me. 2 Corinthians 4:17. Paul says, this momentary thing I'm going through, you know, how many of you have kids that are in their 30s or above their 30s? You know what my idea was? That I assumed that at a certain age, you just don't worry about it. Everything's rosy. And have enough parents making noise. But I've learned this. I don't care how old they get. Whatever they go through, you go through. Whatever your grandkids go through, but you have no control over anything. I'm like, Lord, this is just not right. I'm just telling you that sometimes our perceptions are not that of the wakeful tree that wakes up before all the other trees to discern the boiling pot and not be afraid in the year of drought. So Paul says this momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all that I can compare it to. Well, Lord, the only thing I can compare it right now is the conflict. Because I don't see the wakeful tree yet. You'll catch it in just a second. Verse 18, here's the key. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. Help me understand this. If you cannot see the things that are seen, but you're supposed to see the things that you cannot see, is he crazy, or do you have some different eyes that have the ability to see the wakeful tree and the boiling pot in the future, and you're not stressed about it? He says, don't look at the things that you can see, but the things that are not seen. For the things which are seen, they are temporal. But the things that are not, they are eternal. Therefore, Paul is pressed between, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. I don't even know what to choose. Oh, I will choose to stay here with you because it's much more fruitful for you. And I'm like, I'll see you later. Let Rudy take it from now on. That's the way you think naturally. But that's not the way God thinks of you. Jeremiah sees a young, not prepared man. God sees a prophet in the making. Amen. This thing is coming out to destroy. God sees a church that rises above the storm, is able to prophesy into the storm and say to all that wind, be still, in Jesus' name.